I was too old at 42, he said, as if a decade of loyalty meant nothing. 2 weeks later, I made him wish he'd never opened his mouth. They thought replacing me with a 25-year-old was future-proofing the company. The kid had fresh ideas, sure, but no clue how to execute them. Meanwhile, I sat in my empty apartment, staring at severance papers that felt like a death sentence. But here's what Trevor didn't understand about experience. It teaches you patience, strategy, and exactly how to dismantle someone's empire piece by piece. My name is Bethany Carter, and for 9 years, I was the strategic backbone of Granite Point Ventures. At 42, I'd built every successful marketing campaign that put this Denver fintech startup on the map. While 20-somethings cycled through the office like seasonal interns, I was the one who understood market psychology, client retention, and the delicate art of building trust in financial technology. Then Trevor Langford became CEO. At 34, Trevor strutted into our offices with Silicon Valley swagger and a vocabulary full of buzzwords like disruptive innovation and generational shift. He'd sold 2 startups before they could fail and somehow convinced our board that youth was synonymous with vision. From day one, he made it clear that experience was dead weight. The writing was on the wall during our quarterly strategy meeting. I'd just presented a comprehensive analysis of our Q3 performance, numbers that clearly showed my campaigns had driven 40% of our new client acquisitions. Trevor barely glanced at the data before cutting me off. "Marketing isn't for people stuck in the past," he said, his voice carrying across the conference room like a slap. "We need fresh perspectives, not outdated strategies that worked in the 2010s. The room fell silent. My colleagues, people I'd mentored, people whose careers I'd helped build, suddenly found their laptops fascinating. I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice steady. "These strategies are working, Trevor. The numbers prove it." He smiled that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. "Bethany, I appreciate everything you've done here, but we're moving in a different direction. A younger direction." "Younger direction?" He might as well have said, "You're too old to matter." A week later, I was called into HR. The termination letter was wrapped in corporate speak about restructuring and cultural alignment, but the message was crystal clear. I was being replaced because I wasn't 25 anymore. 9 years of loyalty, of 60-hour weeks, of turning down better offers because I believed in Granite Point's mission. None of it mattered. As I packed my desk, watching Trevor parade my replacement around the office, a bright-eyed 25-year-old with an MBA and 0 real-world experience, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, burning rage. Not the professional frustration I'd swallowed during budget meetings or the mild annoyance at missed deadlines. This was personal. They thought my age made me irrelevant. But they'd forgotten something crucial about experience. It teaches you exactly how to destroy what someone else has built. The first week after termination hit like a physical blow. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. out of habit, reach for my phone to check overnight emails, then remember I had nowhere to go. The silence in my apartment was deafening. For 9 years, my identity had been wrapped up in quarterly reports, client presentations, and the constant hum of office politics. Now I was just another middle-aged woman with a severance package and a growing sense of obsolescence. I spent days replaying every interaction with Trevor, dissecting each meeting for signs I'd missed. Had I been too comfortable? Too set in my ways? The self-doubt crept in like poison. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was stuck in the past, clinging to strategies that worked when social media was still finding its footing. By day 4, I was spiraling. I'd applied to 12 similar positions and gotten 3 polite rejections. All cited cultural fit. Code 4, "You're too old for our hip startup environment." The mirror reflected a competent professional. But apparently, the market saw something else. Damaged goods with an expiration date. That's when Melissa Granger called. "You sound like hell," she said without preamble. Melissa had been my roommate at Colorado State, and now she was a labor attorney with a reputation for eating corporate lawyers alive. "I feel like hell," I admitted, curled up on my couch in the same pajamas I'd worn for 2 days. "Well, get dressed. We're meeting for coffee, and I'm bringing paperwork. An hour later, she spread documents across our table at the daily grind. Wrongful termination based on age discrimination, she said, tapping the forms with her pen. Trevor's comments about younger direction and people stuck in the past. That's textbook ageism. You've got a solid case. I stared at the papers. The idea of dragging this through courts, of depositions and discovery, of being painted as the bitter older woman who couldn't accept change, it made my stomach turn. I don't want to be a victim. Mel. You're not a victim. You're a survivor who's about to get paid. But something else was crystallizing in my mind. Something sharper than legal victory. Trevor hadn't just fired me. He'd underestimated me. He'd assumed that age meant resignation, that experience meant accepting defeat gracefully. He'd forgotten that I knew Granite Point better than anyone, understood its vulnerabilities, its pressure points. No, I said, pushing the papers back toward her. I'm not fighting this in court. Melissa frowned. Beth, you're walking away from a significant settlement. I smiled for the first time in a week. I'm not walking away, I'm going to war. And I'm going to win it with exactly what Trevor thinks makes me irrelevant, my experience. The plan was already forming. I wouldn't beat them by crying discrimination. I'd beat them by being better. 3 days of focused research revealed exactly what I needed to know. Trevor was rushing to launch FlexPay, a digital payment platform I'd originally conceptualized during my final months at Granite Point. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd fired the architect and kept the blueprint, but I knew something he didn't. FlexPay had fundamental security vulnerabilities that I'd flagged in my original proposal. Trevor, in his eagerness to beat competitors to market, had ignored those warnings. Now he was sitting on a ticking time bomb. My first call was to Marcus Rivera at Atlas Equity Partners. I'd helped Granite Point secure their Series A funding 18 months ago. And Marcus owed me a favor. More importantly, he was tired of watching promising startups implode under inexperienced leadership. Bethany, his voice was warm when he answered. I heard about Granite Point. Trevor's an idiot. I'm calling about something bigger than sympathy, I said. I want to start a consulting firm. Horizon Strategies. Focus on market strategy and startup advisory. You have my attention. I need seed funding, not much, just enough to get established and hire the right people. Marcus didn't hesitate. Send me a proposal. But honestly, you had me at making Trevor look stupid. Within a week, I had backing and a plan. My next move was recruiting. I started with Sarah Kim, Granite Point's former lead developer who'd quit 3 months ago after Trevor dismissed her concerns about FlexPay's architecture. One coffee meeting was all it took. He's rushing a broken product to market, Sarah confirmed, her frustration still raw. The authentication system has holes you could drive a truck through. What if I told you there was a way to make sure the market knew that before launch? Her smile was sharp. I'd ask when we start. Next came David Wu, our former client relations manager who'd been restructured out 2 weeks before me. His contacts in the investment community were gold. Then Jessica Martinez, a brilliant young analyst who'd been passed over for promotion because she'd challenged Trevor's projections. By the end of the month, Horizon Strategies was operational. We set up shop in a sleek co-working space 6 blocks from Granite Point's offices, close enough to feel like a statement, far enough to avoid awkward encounters. The team was small but surgical. Sarah handled technical analysis. David managed investor relations. Jessica ran market research, and I orchestrated the overall strategy. We weren't just building a company, we were building a weapon. Our first target was FinConnect Denver, the region's premier fintech conference where Trevor planned to officially launch FlexPay. Every major investor, every tech journalist, every industry influencer would be there. It was the perfect stage for a very public demonstration of why experience matters. You realize we're about to end his career, Jessica said during our final planning session. I looked around the conference room at my team, smart, hungry, underestimated, just like me. No, I corrected. We're about to show him what happens when you mistake age for weakness. FinConnect Denver was Trevor's moment to shine, and he'd made sure everyone knew it. The conference program featured Granite Point's FlexPay launch as the keynote presentation. Trevor had been doing interviews for weeks, promising to revolutionize digital payments with what he called next-generation financial technology. What he didn't know was that we'd been laying groundwork for 3 weeks. Sarah had documented every security flaw in FlexPay's architecture, creating a detailed technical report that read like a hacker's wish list. David had been having casual conversations with key investors, planting seeds of doubt about rushed product launches and inexperienced leadership. Jessica had compiled market research showing how similar platforms had failed spectacularly when they prioritized speed over security. The beauty of our approach was its subtlety. We weren't making accusations. We were asking questions. The right questions to the right people at the right time. 2 days before the conference, I made my move. I reached out to Amanda Torres, a cybersecurity journalist at TechCrunch who'd been following the fintech security crisis. I'd met her at a previous conference, and she remembered me as someone who actually understood the technical side of financial technology. I've been hearing concerning things about FlexPay, I told her over coffee. Have you looked into their security protocols? I slid Sarah's technical analysis across the table. Amanda's eyes widened as she read. This is devastating, she said. Authentication vulnerabilities, unencrypted data transmission, inadequate fraud detection. How did this pass internal review? That's exactly what the industry should be asking, I replied. Especially since they're launching at FinConnect. Amanda's article went live the morning of Trevor's presentation. The headline was perfect. FlexPay's security gaps, when innovation ignores protection. It was factual, well-researched, and absolutely damning. But the real damage came from our coordinated effort at the conference itself. David had arranged for several Atlas Equity contacts to attend Trevor's presentation. During the Q&A, they asked pointed questions about security audits, regulatory compliance, and data protection. Trevor's answers were evasive, clearly unprepared for technical scrutiny. Can you walk us through your fraud detection algorithms? Asked Patricia Lee from Sequoia Gate Capital, Granite Point's primary investor. Trevor fumbled through a non-answer about proprietary processes and industry-standard protocols. In the audience, I watched Patricia's expression shift from interest to concern. The killing blow came when Dr. James Abbott, a cybersecurity expert we'd briefed, stood up during the final question. Mr. Langford, given the recent TechCrunch article highlighting significant security vulnerabilities in FlexPay, how do you respond to concerns that your platform could expose users to fraud and data breaches? The room fell silent. Trevor's face went pale. That article contains inaccuracies that we're addressing with our legal team. So you're not denying the vulnerabilities exist? We're confident in our security measures. That's not what I asked. The presentation ended with polite applause that sounded more like a funeral dirge. Within hours, the tech blogs were running stories about Granite Point's security crisis and Trevor's evasive responses. Social media amplified every uncomfortable moment. By evening, Patricia Lee had requested an emergency board meeting. 2 other major investors had issued statements expressing concerns about product readiness. The FlexPay launch was quietly postponed indefinitely. Trevor spent the next day in crisis mode, trying to identify the source of the leaks. He suspected corporate espionage, competitor sabotage, disgruntled employees, everything except the truth. The woman he'd dismissed as too old had just destroyed his career highlight in less than 72 hours. But I wasn't finished. This was just the opening move. The FinConnect disaster was just the appetizer. While Trevor scrambled to contain the FlexPay fallout, I was already executing Phase 2. Jessica had spent weeks analyzing Granite Point's financial statements, and what she'd found was explosive. Trevor had been inflating user engagement metrics and projecting revenue growth that defied market reality. Worse, he'd been using these fabricated numbers to secure additional funding rounds, essentially committing investor fraud. The retention rates he's reporting are mathematically impossible, Jessica explained during our Monday strategy meeting. He's claiming 94% customer retention when industry standard is 60%, and their actual churn rate is closer to 70%. That's not creative accounting, David said grimly. That's securities fraud. I'd been hoping for ammunition, but this was a nuclear weapon. Still, I needed the right delivery system. A leak to a tech blog wouldn't carry enough weight. This required serious financial journalism. I reached out to Robert Kane at the Market Watchman, Denver's most respected financial publication. Robert had been covering fintech for 15 years, and he had a reputation for thorough, devastating exposés. More importantly, he'd been following Granite Point's meteoric rise with skepticism. I've been wondering when someone would dig deeper into their numbers, he said when I called. The growth trajectory never made sense. What if I told you I had documentation proving systematic financial misrepresentation? I'd say you better have ironclad evidence because that's career-ending stuff. We met at a quiet restaurant in Cherry Creek. I brought Jessica's analysis, David's investor communications, and most damaging of all, internal emails I'd saved from my time at Granite Point showing Trevor's direct involvement in manipulating metrics. Robert spent 2 hours reviewing everything. His expression grew darker with each page. This is Theranos-level deception, he finally said. How did the board not catch this? Because they trusted a young, charismatic CEO who spoke their language about disruption and growth. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. They assumed experience was liability, not wisdom. The article ran on a Thursday morning with a headline that made my heart race. Granite Point's House of Cards. How inflated metrics hid a failing business model. Robert had expanded on our research, interviewing former employees and conducting his own analysis. The picture he painted was devastating. The market response was immediate and brutal. Granite Point's stock price plummeted 60% within hours. Trading was suspended twice. By lunch, Sequoia Gate Capital had issued a statement reviewing their investment position. By evening, they'd pulled out entirely, taking $50 million in funding with them. Trevor's desperate damage control efforts only made things worse. He called an emergency press conference, denying the allegations while simultaneously announcing a comprehensive internal review. His nervous energy and defensive answers convinced no one. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. I knew because David still had contacts inside who were happy to share information about Trevor's impending demise. But I wanted to be there for the finale. On Thursday evening, I made a call to Patricia Lee. Patricia, it's Bethany Carter. I heard about the board meeting tomorrow. Bethany. Her voice was strained. I should have listened to you about Trevor from the beginning. I'm not calling to say I told you so. I'm calling to offer help. Horizon Strategies specializes in crisis management and corporate restructuring. Granite Point needs someone who understands the business from the ground up. There was a long pause. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that sometimes the solution to a problem is the person who saw it coming. Friday morning, I walked into Granite Point's conference room for the first time in 2 months. The same room where Trevor had humiliated me, where he declared me too old to matter. This time, I wasn't there as an employee. I was there as the consultant hired to clean up his mess. Trevor was already slumped in his chair when I entered the boardroom, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in 5 days. His usual swagger had evaporated, replaced by the hollow stare of someone watching his empire crumble in real time. Patricia Lee stood at the head of the table, her expression granite hard. Trevor, effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties as CEO. The board has lost confidence in your leadership and your creative approach to financial reporting. Trevor's head snapped up. You can't do this. I built this company. You nearly destroyed it, Patricia cut him off. We're bringing in Horizon Strategies to assess the damage and develop a recovery plan. That's when Trevor saw me. His face went through a spectrum of emotions, confusion, recognition, and finally, bitter understanding. You, he whispered. You did this. I took my seat at the table, spreading my files with deliberate calm. I didn't do anything. Trevor, I simply let the market see what you'd built and what you'd hidden. The security vulnerabilities, the financial analysis, the media campaign. That was all you. That was all true. I met his eyes steadily. Every single detail was factual. The only difference between 2 months ago and today is that people finally know what I've always known. Trevor's voice cracked. Why? Why did you destroy everything? I leaned forward, my voice low and controlled. You fired me because you thought I was too old to understand innovation. You replaced me with someone half my age because you believed experience was a liability. You humiliated me in front of colleagues who respected me, and you did it with a smile. The room was dead silent. Even Patricia had stopped shuffling papers. Today, I'm exactly the same age I was when you fired me. I continued. I'm still 42. I still have the same gray hairs, the same supposed lack of fresh perspective. But somehow, this old, outdated mind just saved a company that your young, innovative leadership nearly destroyed. Trevor slumped back in his chair, defeated. So what happens now? Now. I stood up, gathering my materials. Now you learn what I learned 2 months ago. That in this business, results matter more than age. Competence matters more than charisma. And wisdom, real wisdom, comes from understanding that experience isn't something to be discarded. It's something to be earned. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Trevor? Next time you want to fire someone for being too old, remember this moment. Remember that the person you're dismissing might just be the one who understands your business better than you do. I left him sitting in that empty conference room, surrounded by the wreckage of his arrogance. The company he'd tried to revolutionize would survive, but his career was over. And I was the one who delivered the final blow, not through lawsuits or complaints, but through the very experience he deemed worthless. Age doesn't matter. Results do. Thank you for listening to this story of workplace revenge and the power of experience. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story? Are you dealing with age discrimination in your own workplace? Please comment below to share your thoughts. Subscribe to hear more stories like this, and let me know what resonates with you. Your experiences and perspectives make these stories come alive.